This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Welcome everyone. The 12 months that have passed since the last Shabbos Haggadol have been from among the most difficult 12-month periods in recent history. Global pandemic. We all know people who lost loved ones. We're all mourning the loss of Gedolei Yisrael. Rav David Feinstein Zechatzak Levracha, Novominsker Rebbe. Financial turmoil. It was a year of anxiety, many out of work, kids out of school. For many of us, it was a year of Marror, a year of bitterness, 12 months that we would like them to be in the rear-view mirror and just forget about. And yet, as believing Jews, and as intelligent people, who understand that everything is the hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, can we just forget about what transpired? Can we bury our heads in the sand and relegate it to a faded memory? How are we able to use the historic turmoil to develop ourselves as better Yidden, as better people? As much as we would like to run away from the bitterness of the last 12 months, Mishnah Berurah tells us in Siman Taf Ayin Zayin, Mishnah Berurah brings down an ancient custom in the name of the Shlach HaKadosh. It says, Mishnah Berurah, Ra'isi mimnei aliyah shahiyu menashkin hamatzos. I see elevated people, Gehoibin people, the night of the Seder, they kiss the matzah. Yeah, and that, I understand, I get that, people. We kiss our talis, we kiss our tefillin. People go to Eretz Yisrael, they get down on the floor, they kiss the land. The Kaisel HaMaravi, but then the Mishnah Berurah adds, V'hamaror, that the minhag is to kiss the maror. The night of the Seder, we kiss the maror. Kiss the maror? Yes, because the night of the Seder, we don't run away from our challenges. The night of the Seder, we embrace them. There's an amazing phenomenon that we encounter the night of the Seder. While all other nights of the year, we don't really do specific mitzvahs. When it comes to all other mitzvahs, we do it specifically in the daytime. Talis is in the day. Tefillin is in the day. Hallel you're only allowed to do in the day. Daled Minim only during the day. Pesach is the only time of the year that we do the mitzvahs only during the nighttime. Hallel that we usually say during the day on Pesach, we specifically say it at night. Why? The pasuk says in Tehillim Parak Kuf Lamed Tes, Laila Kayoim Yair. He lights up the night like the day. That the Rebbeinu Shalom has the capacity at times he will light up the night like the day. When did the Rebbeinu Shalom do that? When did it happen? Says the Zohar HaKadosh, Leil Hiskadesh Achag. The holy night of Pesach, Haya Me'ira Li Yisrael B'Mitzrayim Ketzeis HaShemesh, illuminated for the Jewish people like the sun comes out. That is why, even though the mitzvah is to relate the events of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the night of the 15th, but what does the pasuk say? V'higada talabincha bayoim ahu leimar. Relate to your children on that day. Even though it's the nighttime, the Torah calls it the day, because it was literally like the day. It was Laila Kayom Yair. That is why the Shlach HaKadosh says, we say Laila Kayom Yair, not Laila Kayom Ta'ir. That is why, says the Shla, we say in the Haggadah, Maisa b'Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Lezer ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfain, Shahayu Mesubin, B'vnei Brak, V'hayu Mesaprim, B'yitzias Mitzrayim, Kol Oisoi Halayla, not Oisoi Halayla, because that night had the characteristic of the day. Says Shalos Teshuvos Yad Eliyahu, Mila is only kosher bayom, and yet the night of Yetzias Mitzrayim, Klal Yisrael did Mila, because that night had the halachic status of the day, to the extent they were allowed to do Mila. In fact, our Chaim HaKadosh says that part of the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim is to relate to our children about that amazing miracle that Hashem lit up the night like the day. So says the Chidah, although we're supposed to be in Mitzrayim for 430 years, yet we were only in Mitzrayim 215 years. How do you calculate that? Because Rabbi Lezer says you start the 215 years from the birth of Menashe and Ephraim. So Chidah is bothered, this miracle of Laila Kayom Yoyer, why did the Rebbeinu Shalom make this miracle? And the Chida answers, because we were supposed to be in Mitzrayim 430, but we were only there 215. Why? How did we do it in half time? The answer is, says the Chida, it's because the Ribono Shel Olam punished the Mitzrayim Mida Keneged Mida. The Mitzrayim made us work during the day and during the night. They turned our nights into days. So Mida Keneged Mida, the Ribono Shel Olam dealt with the Mitzrayim and he lit up the night like the day. But still, we have to dig a little deeper. My good friend in England, Rabbi Josh Morhaim, asked me, Rabbi Glatstein, in the Sefer you wrote about the miracle of Laila Kayom Yoyer, but why did the Ribono Shel Olam do it? What's the deeper meaning? What's the message? What can we take out of this miracle? Hashem doesn't make miracles for nothing. So we would like to try to uncover the surface. What exactly was the message of Laila Kayom Yoyer? As the introduction to Yetzias Mitzrayim, before the Ribono Shel Olam articulates the Dal L'shonos of Geula, V'Haitzesi, V'Yitzalti, V'Ga'alti, V'Lakachti, the Ribono Shel Olam criticizes and rebukes Moshe Rabbeinu severely. He says in the very last pasuk of Shemos, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Ata Sireh Asher Esa Lefaroi. You'll see what I'm going to do to Paroi. Ki b'yad chazaka yishalchem. You're going to see what I do to Paroi, but you will not see what I do to the 31 kings of Canaan, because you're not entering Canaan. You questioned me. You were Marror achar midoisai. When you said to Paroi that Hashem sent me to tell you that you have to let the Jews go, and Paroi responded, "Nah, from now on, you guys have too much time on your hands. From now on, instead of the same quota of bricks, now you have to gather the straw as well." And you came back to me, you said, Ribono Shel Olam, you gave me a job and it just exacerbated the issue, just made bigger problems. Hashem says, Moshe, you're questioning me. You're not like Avram. I said to Avram, your future is Yitzchak, Kibi Yitzchak Yikar L'Chazara. And I told him to bring him up as an oila, and he didn't question me. You, Moshe, you're not going into Eretz Yisrael. Rashi brings in the beginning of Va'ira, the Lashon of the Medrash, Chaval al da'avdin v'lay mishtachchen. Woe to those who are lost. Says Rabbi, I really miss the Avos. The Avos had their fair share of challenges, and then they never questioned me. They're never mahar achari midoisai. And you, Moshe, you say to me, Lama harei oisa la'am hazeh lama zeh shlachtani. Hashem had tainus on Moshe Rabbeinu. This is very difficult. What's the taina of Moshe Rabbeinu? What did he do wrong? That he complained? That he questioned? And the Avos never complained, they never questioned? Situation of the Avos is not remotely similar at all to the situation of Moshe Rabbeinu. The Avos had personal challenges, and therefore they had no right to question HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if this challenge was a personal challenge of Moshe Rabbeinu would have been Mekabel Yisurim Bi'ahava. But the Ribono Shel Olam is not giving Moshe a personal challenge. This is Klal Yisrael, who are suffering intense, crushing bondage. They were being abused, crushed, progressively getting worse and worse. Moshe is the Raya Mehemna Rosh. Moshe is the leader. How can a leader remain in silence while his people suffered? That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted for Moshe? That Moshe to keep his mouth closed? Of course not. Hashem wants the manig to fight for his people. Ask Rabbi Yaakov Naiman, Rashiva Petach Tikva in his Sefer Darkei Musar. Moshe Rabbeinu was obligated to speak up. After the Chet HaEgel, when the Ribono Shel Olam says to Moshe, I'm going to destroy Klal Yisrael, Moshe says, Lama yechrab chabiyamecha. We don't find Moshe Rabbeinu was ever punished. Why now? And what does Hashem answer Moshe? What's the response? The opening pasuk. Va'era vayedaber Elokim el Moshe vayomer elav ani Hashem. And Elokim said to Moshe, Ani Hashem. Forgive the analogy, but what does it mean? Elokim said to Moshe, Ani Hashem. That's like Levine said to Cohen, my name is Friedman. Well, what's Ribono Shel Olam saying? I have a different name? And then Hashem tells Moshe, v'hoitzesi, v'itzalti, v'ga'alti, v'lakachti, 4 lashonos of Geula. What's Ribono Shel Olam telling Moshe? Moshe had a simple question. Ribono Shel Olam, you gave me a job. I did the job, and it only made matters worse. And now they have to fulfill the quota of bricks, and they have to gather their own straw. Why did you give me the job? It just created bigger problems. So how's the Rebbe Shem answering that question? I'm going to take them out. I'm going to take them out. Moshe knows Hashem's going to take them out. The question is, the job was pointless. The job just made things worse. So Rabbi, we have 4 questions on Yetzias Mitzrayim. Number 1, what is the deeper meaning of Laila Kayom Yo'er? Number 2, what is the Taina Moshe Rabbeinu for saying Lama Hareyoisa? He's just defending his people. Number 3, what's the meaning of the opening of Va'ira, the opening introduction to Yetzias Mitzrayim? Vayedaber Elokim el Moshe, Vayomer Elov Ani Hashem. And number 4, what is the Rebbe Shem's response to Moshe's question that his going to Parai only made things worse? For this year's Shabbos Haggadol Drasha, I would like to speak about one of your favorite Seder dishes. I want to speak about the subject of charoises. Charoises may not sound like the most important subject, but as the Marror writes, Marror says, "V'lo yehi davar kal be'inav, af im kama dvarim yesh beseder, shenira be'inei adam shenak padamhem." Nothing should be light in your eyes, even if it seems something in the Seder is not very critical. Yaskil b'daitoi l'kayim. You should be careful. You should comprehend to fulfill. She'ein davar reiko. This is not an empty matter. And this could not be a more apt description of charoises, as it is so laden with meaning and significance. But let us begin with a remarkable comment of the Rambam. The Rambam writes in Hilchos Chametz Umatzah, Perek Zayin Halacha Ches. Says the Rambam, an amazing Rambam, Umetavel matzah b'charoises v'oichel. You should dip matzah in charoises and eat it. Yeah, you heard right. Shitas HaRambam is that we dip matzah in charoises. Well, to quote the great Rabbi Isaac Bernstein, he says, comes the Ravid, and as Shakespeare said, whenever you have a Rambam, the Ravid is not far behind. Zak the Ravid, Omar Avram, Zehevel. The Ravid said, there's nonsense. Whoever heard of such a thing, to dip matzah in charoises? You ever hear of such a thing? Dip the matzah in the charoises. But what exactly is the Torah's question? What exactly is the Ravid's question? So the Torah cites the Sefer HaManhig, who clarifies the question on the Rambam. Says the Sefer HaManhig, he says, Matzah hi zecher lecheros. Matzah commemorates the freedom. Charoises zecher letit. The charoises commemorates the cement. Heich yischabru zeh zeh. How do you mix one with the other? The matzah is the freedom. The charoises is the bondage. Never shall the twain meet. What is the meaning of the Shitas HaRambam? So I'd like to share with you the following approach to explain the Shita of the Rambam. Let's speak about the ingredients of charoises. Rabbi Wein records in his Haggadah on page 28. He says, while everyone in the family has a different responsibility in preparing for the Seder, my time-honored task is to prepare the charoises, the dip that is used in conjunction with the marror and that is reminiscent in texture to the lime that our forefathers used in their construction work when they were slaves in Egypt. Charoises is made of ingredients that in biblical texts are symbolic of the Jewish people: apples, walnuts, dates, figs, almonds, wine, and cinnamon. Though the ingredients of charoises are well known to all, the exact formulation of those ingredients is what makes charoises really work. My recipe is so secret that I myself forget it from year to year. But somehow the charoises always turns out delicious, and after its ritual use with the bitter herbs, it becomes the spread of choice on the grandchildren's matzah during the Seder meal. Yes, he says you could buy matzah charoises concentrate, but making your own is just far superior. So let's try to understand halachically. What is the halachic basis for the ingredients and the method of making charoises? The Mishnah tells us in Pesach, Madaf Kuf Yudalid, that in the opinion of Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok, charoises is a mitzvah. The Mishnah says the Chachamim say it's not a mitzvah, but we follow Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok that making charoises is a mitzvah. What's the mitzvah? Comes the Gemara in Daf Kuf Tezayin. My mitzvah, Reb Levi Oimer, Zecher letapuach, to remember the apples. that the Jewish women were not able to have children. They were going to be killed by the Egyptians, and they gave birth under the apple trees in relative comfort. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Zeichel Atid, Rabbi Yochanan says to commemorate the cement. Amar Abaye Hilkach Tzarech L'Kiyuye V'Tzarech L'Smuche. Abaye says, therefore you need to make it tart and you need to make it thick. L'Kiyuye Zeichel Tapuach, you make it tart to remember the apples. V'Tzarech L'Smuche Zeichel Atid. You have to make it thick to remember the cement. The Gemara then adds a third dimension. Rabbi Yochanan says you have to add in teven, you have to add in tavlin, you have to add in spices, zeicher leteven. You have to add in spices to commemorate the straw. So we have three dimensions of charosis. Number one, it has to be tart to remember the apples, it has to be thick to remember the cement, and it has to have spices to remember the straw that Bnei Yisrael had to collect. Comes Tosfos, and Tosfos is bothered. So what is charosis? Apples and spices? That's a salad. So why in halacha is dipping something in charosis considered tibulei b'mashka? Dipping it into a liquid. There's no liquid here. Says Tosfos in the name of Yerushalmi, another aspect of charosis. A fourth aspect. It has to be zecher ledam. So says Tosfos, the minhag is to make it thick, and then when you bring it to the table, you mix wine or vinegar, and you make it lighter. So far we have four aspects of charosis. Number one, it has to be tart to remember the apples. It has to be thick to remember the cement. It has to have spices to remember the straw. And it has to have wine to recall the blood. Comes the Rama, Or Chaim Sim Taf Ayin Gimel, and he codifies all the aspects of charosis. And the Rama adds a fifth aspect that adds many more ingredients to the charosis. The Rama quotes Tosfos. Tosfos brings the Tshuvas Haggaonim. With Tshuvas Haggaonim Mefarish, that you make charosis from the peiros that Klal Yisrael are compared to in Shir Hashirim. So we're compared to an apple, Tachas HaTapuach or Articha. We're compared to a pomegranate, Kefelach Harimain. We're compared to figs, as it says Hate'ina Chanta Fagea, by the way, unless you know how to check figs for bugs, don't recommend using them. We're compared to dates, don't recommend using dates. You also have to know how to check dates for bugs. We're compared to nuts, elginas, egois, yaradity. And finally, says Tosfos, we put in shkedim, almonds. Why do we put in almonds? Al shem sheshakat HaKadosh Baruch Hu ala ketz. Because God hastened the redemption, He hastened the end. So we put in shkedim to remember the expedition of the Geula. Now, when it comes to the spices, the Rama says, what spices should you use? Either zangvil, which is ginger, or cinnamon, which is cinnamon. Interestingly, the Mishnah Berurah says of Katanun, that the spices recall the straw, because she'eni doichen hetev, they're not ground well, it's hard to grind them, vehim aruchim, and they're long, and therefore they resemble the straw. Interestingly, Shar Tzion brings from the Maharil not to grind the spices at all. This way they remain long and they resemble straw. For this reason, the stipler, in the Orchos Rabbeinu, it's reported that he would not use his vegetable grinder to produce the charoises. Instead, he would use a meat grinder, so it would have more of an appearance like straw. But Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky suggests that perhaps even if you grind the spices completely, nevertheless, perhaps it's not the length of the spices that makes it resemble straw, but rather the way it's mixed, it resembles cement. Now, very interesting, there are two ways of making charoises. Tosfos that we quoted, in Arvei Pesachim says, that you make the charoises thick, uveshas achila, and when you come to eat it, makal shenoisai b'yayin uvechometz, you lighten it up with wine. And the Torah codifies this approach to halacha. The Torah brings the Yerushalmi, some make it thick, some make it light. And Rabbeinu Yechiel says they're both true. It's thick and it's light. In the beginning, you start off, you make it thick, zeicher latit, and then when you come to mixing it, then you should add wine or the vinegar. So according to the Torah, and this is codified by the Shulchan Aruch Harav and the Chayei Adam, that you bring it to the table thick, and right before you dip the maror in it, you pour the wine in. I don't think most people do that, but I do believe if you don't know what your minhag is, that's what should be done. That is what is codified in the Poskim. However, many people don't do this way. Rav Shmuel Kamnetsky doesn't do it this way. Rav Shmuel mixes the wine in immediately, and this is based on the terminology of the Rambam. The Rambam says, "V'ketzad oisin oisa, noisin l'soichan chometz, u'metavlin oisa betavlin, and u'mevin oisa ala shulchan," which indicates you mix the wine in it before you bring it to the table. Now, interestingly, when should you make the charoises? Says the Mishnah Berurah of Katan Mem Zayin, v'ya'asehu me'erev yomtiv. You should make the charoises erev yomtiv. Erev yomtiv. Why should you make it erev yomtiv? So oichel nefesh, aren't you allowed to do oichel nefesh? Aren't you allowed to do malacha for oichel nefesh on yomtiv? So Mechaber says, Siman Taf Tzadi Hey, Kol malacha asura b'yomtiv, all malacha is asa on yomtiv, chutz mi malachas oichel nefesh, except for malacha which is needed for oichel nefesh. Haga, v'yesh machmir, and there are those who are machmir. Afilu ba'oichel nefesh atzmai, even for malacha needed for eating, kol she'enoi mafik tam klal masamei erev yomtiv. In other words, if it doesn't diminish the taste of the food by using it erev yomtiv, you're allowed to, you're supposed to do it erev yomtiv. You should not do it on yomtiv. However, says the Rama, miyum lo yasamei erev yomtiv. If you didn't do it erev yomtiv and you need to do it for yomtiv, you're allowed to do it without a shinoi. So there's a yesh machmirin, that any time you could have done the malacha of oichel nefesh before, and it would have come out just as good. So the halacha is you're supposed to do it on Erev Yom Tif, and you're only allowed to do it on Yom Tif with a shinoi. How do we paskin? Mishnah Berurah and Sivkatan Ches says we're paskin like the Yesh Machmirin, and this is something again that Mishnah Berurah says that won't be lost or ruined if you do it the day before. However, it says in Mishnah Berurah, if one was an oinus and he couldn't do it Erev Yom Tif, you're allowed to do it on Yom Tif even without a shinoi. The Magen Avraham even says, l'chatchila, you could wait and do it on Yom Tif and rely on the fact that you're allowed to do it with the shinoi. Other achronim dispute that. Now, so therefore it would come out, it's best to make the charoises Erev Yom Tif. If you can make it on Yom Tif, you have to do it with a shinoi. This year, where Erev Pesach is Shabbos, there's more basis to be able to make the preparations on Yom Tif itself. Let's hone in on one particular ingredient of charoises. We mentioned charoises reminds us of cement, tzarch l'smuche. It reminds us of the straw, so we put in the tavlin. But there's one ingredient, however, that seems out of place: the shkedim, the almonds. Why do we put almonds in the charoises? Ushkedim al shem, Tosfos says, sheshakat HaKadosh Baruch Hu al haketz. We put in shkedim because Hashem sped up the geula. The charoises is to remember the bondage. The charoises is to remember the cement, to remember the intense labor. Why in the world would we put in an ingredient that symbolizes the geula? The shkedim, what are they doing in the charoises? They're completely out of place. The charoises is cement. Why put an ingredient that symbolizes the expedition of the geula? This is a question of Rabbi Yerucham Olshin. He says, Mahu toichen ha'inyan shemaisifen shkedim charoises al shem sheshakar HaKadosh Baruch Hu al haketz eich shayach inyan zeh lezecher letid shu zecher leshibud. Back to the Rambam and the Ravid. Why does the Rambam say we dip matzah in charoises? Enters the Aderes, Rabbi Eliyahu David Rabinowitz Te'umim. This is cited in Mikroi Kodesh, Rabbi Tzvi Pesach Frank, in Chelek Beis, page Kuf Ayin Beis. Aderes was born in 1845. He was a prolific writer. He wrote more than 120 svarim, and at the young age of 31, he was the Rav in Panovich. He became the Rav in Panovich. He remained the Rav for 20 years, but they weren't paying enough, and he moved on from there to the city of Mir. And in 1901, Rav Shmuel Salant, who was the Zaken Hadar, he sent word to Reb Chaim Oizer. He says, I feel my strength is ebbing. I would like you to recommend somebody to come assist me and ultimately be a Mamala Makam. The Aderes happened to be in Vilna at the time, and Reb Chaim Oizer recommended the Aderes for the job. And Aderes loved Eretz Yisrael b'leiv v'nefesh, and he was very excited to be able to go to Eretz Yisrael. Unfortunately, his tenure in Eretz Yisrael did not last long, as he fell ill, and 4 years later he passed on. The Aderes was the father-in-law of the first chief rabbi of Palestine, the Rabbi Yitzchak HaKohen Cook, and I had the zchus to be at Aderes' kever on Har HaZeisim. Says the Aderes that we could explain the position of the Rambam to dip matzah in charoises and the position of the Ravid not to dip the matzah in the charoises based on another machloikis, the Rambam and the Ravid, and this time it's a philosophical machloikis. The Mitzrim were punished severely for their mistreatment of Klal Yisrael. They were drowned in the sea, they were tortured, we took their money. But why? Ask the Rambam, Hilchos Tshuva, Perek Vav, Halacha Hey. Hashem wrote in the Torah that the Mitzrim will enslave us. It was decreed on the Egyptians to punish us. So why were they punished? By the way, this was the argument of Eichmann's attorney in the Eichmann trial, that the Nazis were just carrying out the divine plan. Says the Rambam, it is because Hashem just said in general that there will be members of the nation of Egypt that enslaved Bnei Yisrael, but he did not decree on any specific individual that they would cause any suffering to the Jewish people. V'chein ha-Mitzrim, likewise the Mitzrim, Kol echad v'echad me'oisam ha-Mitzirim v'ha-Mariam li-Yisrael, each and every one of those who distressed and harmed Klal Yisrael, if they didn't want to harm us, they had the ability to not harm us. It was not decreed on any specific person. So the Rambam says that it was not decreed on any particular Egyptian to cause us distress. And the fact that any one of them got up and harmed us, that was their personal decision. But says the Ravid, that's ridiculous. If the Rebbeinu Shalom decrees that certain members of a nation should harm us, then whoever stands up and fulfills the tzivay of Hashem should be applauded and rewarded. Harei zeh zorez v'niskar. Instead, the Ravid offers a different interpretation as to why the Mitzrim were punished for seemingly faithfully fulfilling the command of Hashem. Says the Rabbi, the Rebbeinu Shalom said, "Va'avadum v'inu oisam," that they should enslave us. But the Mitzrim went overboard. They tortured us, befarech. They killed us. They drowned us. As the pasuk says, "Ani katzafti ma'at v'heim azru l'ra." That's why they were punished. Comes the Aderes, and the Aderes asks, why didn't the Rambam say like the Ravid? That because the Mitzrim went overboard and enslaved us so intensely, that's why they were punished. Says the Aderes, the fact that they enslaved us so harshly was not to our detriment of Klal Yisrael. Just the opposite. It was a chesed. Because we were supposed to be in Mitzrayim 430 years. And why did we leave after 210? Because of the excessive shibud, because of the intensity of the labor. So the Mitzrayim did us a favor by going overboard, by enslaving us excessively. They facilitated our early exit. The Ravid will have to say that we left early for other reasons. But according to the Rambam, the Mitzrayim cannot have been punished because they worked us excessively, because that was a big favor to us. Now, says the Aderes, we can answer the question on the Rambam. Why does the Rambam say that to dip the matzah in charoises? Well, why would we do that? The matzah is the cherus. The charoises is the shibud. Says the Aderes, the Rambam holds, the charoises is the perfect complement to the matzah. As the shibud, the excessive shibud is what contributed to the cherus. The Rambam is l'shitasai, that the excessive shibud was a chesed to Klal Yisrael. Says the Aderes, be'emes charoises u'matzah hakol echad hu. Al yidei Hatit v'koshi hashibud yatsu lecherus lefnei hazman. Says that there's the Rav, it is also l'shitase. According to the Rav, the excessive shibud is not why we left early. So says the Rav, to dip the matzah in charoises, zehevel. According to the Rambam, matzah and charoises are the perfect combination. You know, the well-known remez of the Gra, this is like the first Dvar Torah I remember. Vayimaru es chayim. What's the trop on Vayimaru es chayim? Vayimaru es chayim. Kadma v'azla. What does kadma v'azla mean? To proceed and to go. Says the Gra, the gematria of kadma v'azla is 190. Because of Vayimaru es chayim. Because the Mitzrayim embittered our lives, we were kadma v'azla. We advanced and we left early from Mitzrayim. Listen to a Noida Yehuda. Nitzlach am Psachim, Daf Kuf Tezayin Amud Beis. Amar Rabban Gamliel, Kol Shaloi Amar Shloisha Dvarim Halalu B'Pesach, Lo Yatsa Yidei Chayvasai. Ask the Noid Yehuda, what's this terminology, Lo Yatsa Yidei Chayvasai? What does it mean, Lo Yatsa Yidei Chayvasai? Chazal don't say Lo Yatsa Yidei Chayvasai. Chazal say Lo Yatsa. For example, the Gemara in Brachos. HaKorei Shema, V'lo Yishmi'a La'oznai. Lo Yatsa, the Gemara says, Daf Tesvav. What's Lo Yatsa Yidei Chayvasai? Says in Noid Yehuda, we were supposed to be in Mitzrayim 400 years. How did we leave after only 210? Well, there are two approaches. One approach is, as we've been saying, the Kosh Yashibud, the intensity of the bondage. That allowed us to do the extra time in a short amount of time. And the other way of looking at it is, well, we left early and we have to make up the time, and that's the reason for the Arichas Hagalas. Says the Noid Yehuda, he's going to prove that it was the Koishi HaShibud, it was the bitterness of the Shibud that allowed us to leave early. Let's discuss the order. Pesach, Matzah, Marror. It's out of order. The Marror represents the bondage. The Matzah is the Cherus. So first came the Marror and then came the Matzah. First came the bitterness and then came the freedom. Why is it backward? Says in Noid Yehuda, Adarabba, the Marror is not the bitterness. The Marror is not the galus. The Marror is the geula. Because they embittered our lives, that's why we went out early. Says Noid Yehuda, be'emes Adarabba, ha-Marror hu ha-geula ha-amitis, shal yoda al yedei shemeru chayem nishlam hazman. That is what Rabban Gamliel means. If you don't understand the order of first matzah and then maror, that the maror is part of the freedom, lo yatsa yidei chayvasai, then you have not justified leaving Mitzrayim early. Get back into Mitzrayim. Not only have you not fulfilled the mitzvah, but lo yatsa yidei chayvasai, you have not justified leaving Egypt. So Hashem tells Moshe, go to Parai, tell them to let the Jews out. So Moshe goes to Parai, and Parai says, "No, I'm not letting them out. Not only am I not letting them out, the quota of bricks remain the same, and now they have to gather their own straw." So Moshe says, "I don't understand. You tell me to go to Parai and tell them to leave, and what does Parai say? Parai just makes things worse. Lama harei oisa la'am hazeh." Says the Brisker Rav, now we understand clearly what the Rebbeinu Shalom's response to Moshe Rabbeinu was. Rebbeinu Shalom says to Moshe, Moshe, you're making a mistake. It's not worse. It's better. Through the intense shibud. This is what's going to allow Klal Yisrael to leave early. The extra workload will expedite the geula. Atosira. Now you'll see. It's not midas hadin. It's midas harachamim. Lachin emor levnei Yisrael ani Hashem v'hoitzeisi v'hitzalti v'ga'alti v'lakachti eschem v'hevesi eschem el haaretz. Says Rabbi Yerucham Moshe, and now we can understand the comments of the Tshuvas Hagaonim cited by Tosis and Arvei Pesachim, that we put shkedim in the charoises because Hashem was shakar ala kates. We ask, why put an ingredient of geula in the charoises that represents the bondage, that represents the shibud? Says Rabbi Yerucham Moshe, it is precisely the bondage and the bitterness that sped up the geula and allowed us to leave early. Shkedim adds the perfect touch to the charoises. comes Rabbi Yerucham Oshen, and he adds really the critical gem over here, the critical point. It's not only that the Koishi Hashibud sped up the Geula, it's much more than that. The Arizal teaches, and it's rooted in the Zohar, that the Bnei Yisrael were in a very low madrega. They're on the 49th level of Tumah. Had they remained there a moment longer, they would have fallen to the point of no return. Why is it called the point of no return? Because there's no way out, there's no way to get out of the 50th level of Tumah. In fact, the Zohar says, it says 50 times Yitzias Mitzrayim in the Chumash to teach that Hashem was moitzi us from the Memteh Shari Tumah. Says Rabbi Yerucham, it's not just the Koishi Hashibud expedited the Geula. If not for the Koishi Hashibud, there wouldn't have been a Geula. We would have been stuck there permanently. We would have been Harei Anu, Uvanenu, Uvnei Vanenu, Mishubadim, Hayinu Lefaroi. And this adds even more understanding to the Shita of the Rambam that we dip the matzah in the charoises. Not only did the charoises expedite what the matzah represents, the charoises made the cheiros possible. If not for the charoises, there wouldn't have been a geula. So Moshe comes and he says, Ribono shel olam, I came to Paro and you only made matters worse. And Hashem says, no Moshe, you're going to see. The Hoitzeisi, the increased shibud, is not only good, because it will speed up the process of Geula, the increased bondage has made the Geula possible. But what was the Taina of Moshe? He was just defending Klal Yisrael. He was sticking up for us. What was Moshe? What was wrong with what Moshe was doing? And herein lies one of the most fundamental principles of Yetzias Mitzrayim. One of the most important messages of the Haggadah, and one of the most important tenets of Emunah and life in general. Moshe can fight for us. Moshe can defend us. Moshe could say, Lama yechra apcha bi'amecha. But Moshe cannot say, Lama harei oisa. Why did you do bad? Because there's no ra that emanates from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because kol man da'avid rachmana letav avid. Moshe could fight the gzeira. Moshe could be mevatel the gzeira. Moshe could say lama yechere, but not lama harei oisa, that Hashem did ra. That's being mahar acher midoisav, mipi elyon loiseitze harais. Every morning and night, we're makabel the Omachos Shamayim, and we declare Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. What's the message of the Shema? And I've heard this many times, but I was searching and searching. What is the makar of such an idea? And actually, it comes from the Noid Behuda Psachim and Daf Nun Vav. The makar is Shema Yisrael. The Noid Behuda says Shema Yisrael. Hear, integrate, understand Klal Yisrael. Hashem, what seems like Midas Harachamim. Elokeinu, what seems like Midas Hadin. There are good times in life. There are bad times in life. There are ups and there are downs. It's all Midas Harachamim. It's all Hashem Echad. It's all the Shem Havaya. Hashem does not mete out Ra. He does not mete out Din. Only Chesed v'Rachamim. Says the Darkei Musar, Moshe Rabbeinu could fight for us, he could advocate, he could beseech, he cannot say Lama Harei Ois, and therefore says the Goin. The Rebbeinu Shalom begins his criticism of Moshe with the opening of Va'era, Vayedaber Eloikim El Moshe, Vayomer Elav Ani Hashem. Moshe, you see me as Eloikim, you see that you went to Parai, and you see, it seems like it made things worse. You think Amidas Hadin. Moshe, you've got the wrong God, Ani Hashem. Vayomer Elav Ani Hashem. It's all the Midas Harachamim. It's always Rachamim Gedolim. Says the Sefer Chein Tov, Parshas Va'era. Ani Hashem lo ishanisi. I am the Shem Havaya Midas Harachamim, and I never change. I'm never anything but that. Gemara Brachas Daf Samach Lo Ilam Yehei Ragel Adam Loimar. Kalma the Avid Rachmana Letav Avid. A person should always be accustomed to saying, whatever the Rebbeinu Shalom does is for the best. Why should you train yourself to say that? Says the Gra, because it is. Because everything Hashem does is only Tov v'Chesed. The intense Shibud allowed them to leave earlier. The intense Shibud allowed them to leave, period. When do you think was the lowest moment in the life of Yosef HaTzadik? When the Shvatim perhaps grabbed Yosef, Vayafshitu es begadav, they ripped off his clothing, and they threw him in the pit. Yosef's being assaulted, kidnapped, sold, separated from his father, from Eretz Yisrael. It seems like Ra, doesn't it? But listen to a Sfas Emes, a remarkable Sfas Emes. Parshas Vayeshev. Yosef was faced with one of the biggest challenges anyone was ever faced with. Eishes Potifera, a beautiful woman. She was tempting him. She's seducing him. No one would ever know. He's far away from his family, from Klal Yisrael. Vatispaseyu bebigdai. She grabbed his clothing, and Chazal used very descriptive language. His passions were flaring. He was about to commit the Maisa, but Yosef HaTzadik mustered the inner strength. Vayonas hachutza, and he ran out. Says the Sfas Emes, where did Yosef get the inner strength from to overcome such a formidable temptation? Says the Sfas Emes, Vayavshitu es begadav es kutantai. When the brothers ripped off Yosef's garment, Yosef had to face the indignity of having his garments ripped off and the abuse, and he was mekabelet bi'ava. He developed the ability to do the ratzon of Hashem ad kedei kach that his clothing were torn. It seemed like a hardship. It seemed like lama harayosa. But the Rebbe Shalom was grooming him to be able to pass the test of Eishes Potifera when vatispaseyu bevigdai. But let's add a remarkable point. Chazal teach us, when Bnei Yisrael went to the Yam didn't want to split. That is Hayom Ra. That is until Hayom Ra Vayonos. The sea saw and it split. What did the sea see? Aron Yishal Yosef. What about Aron Yishal Yosef? Says the Yalkut Shemaini. The sea saw. Vayazoiv bigdoi biyada vayonos hachutza. The sea saw Yosef fled when she held his clothing. So the sea said, Vayonos Hayom Ra Vayonos. Yosef's whole world is crashing down. Why is he being thrown in a pit? Why is his clothing being torn off? But the Rebbe Shalom says, this is not Ra. Yosef, I'm grooming you to overcome one of the greatest challenges in history. Why is Yosef being tempted? Why does he have to face such a difficult challenge? But in hindsight, we see that the Rebbe Shalom was giving Yosef the opportunity to garner one of the most important zechusim in our history, so that at the critical moment of Jewish history, when Klal Yisrael are standing at the Yam, in between them a rock and a hard place, Klal Yisrael are able to tap into the eternal merit of Yosef HaTzadik. What looks like Ra is sometimes the ultimate Toiv. Yaakov tells his kids, Lama harayoy simli. Why'd you tell the king I have a younger kid? Now he's going to want to bring him down to Mitzrayim. And the Rebbe Shalom says, he has a taina on Yaakov. Why do you say to the Shvatim, Lama harayoy simli, as if they are doing bad to you? Don't you realize I'm orchestrating that Yosef should be the Melech, and that all of you should come down to Mitzrayim so that you could ultimately get out? I don't do bad. Vayidaber Elokim el Moshe vayomer Elov ani Hashem. Shema Yisrael herzachayin yidin. Hashem, what sometimes it looks like Midas Harachamim. Elokeinu, sometimes it looks like Midas Hadin. Hashem Echad. It's all the same. You look at the tefillin of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, on the right side you have the long strap. You think, Midas Harachamim is large, and the left strap, Midas Hadin, there's also Midas Hadin. But the Rebbe Shalom shows Moshe Rabbeinu the kesher of tefillin in the back. It's all one. It's all the Rachamei Shemayim. Through the events of Yetzias Mitzrayim, Kriyas Yamsuf, Klal Yisrael recognize that they need to thank Hashem not only for the Yeshua and the Toiva and the salvation, but even the Shibud and the Marirus was also the Toiva. It was a Kulai Chesed. And so the night of the Seder, we pick up the Marror, we kiss the Marror, we say thank you, Ribono Shel Olam, not only for the Cherus, but not only for the freedom, we thank you for the hard times as well. Because we believe the Emunah Shlema. Vayedaber Elokim El Moshe, Vayomer Elav Ani Hashem. It's all the Midas HaRachamim. These past 12 months have been very difficult for many people. The fear, anxiety, isolation, loneliness, uncertainty, financial stress, and it takes a toll on us. Takes a toll on our psyche and our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Chavos HaVavos writes in the Hakdama to Shar HaBechina that one of the impediments of appreciating the Chesed of Hashem is that when people experience setbacks and hardship, and it dampens their outlook and their ability to appreciate the Chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But learning the tool to realize and appreciate that everything Hashem does is l'taiva changes and transforms one's entire perspective of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Hanhaga in general. Rav Tzvi Hershmi Zidichav, who's known as the Sar Beis HaZoyhar. No one knew the Zoyar like Rav Tzvi Hersh. He was the Rebbe of the Malbim and Kabbalah. He says the Midas Hadin Elokim is 86. But if you split 86 in half, it's number 43. What's number 43? Toiv Hashem, the goodness of Hashem. Because the root of all Midas Hadin, if you unmask what is manifest as Midas Hadin, is the goodness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Rav Pinchas Friedman explains in his Sefer Shvilei Pinchas, this is not just a trick in numbers. The avoida is that by saying and realizing that the Midas Hadin is really the Toiva of Hashem, and this he says is the secret of Gam Zula Toiva. Gam is 43. When you acknowledge that at the root of what's manifest as Midas Hadin, it's really Hashem's Hatava and Rachamim, that allows the Chesed to become apparent and recognized by us, and we could appreciate it. So I was thinking a little bit about the last 12 months, trying to see the silver lining, try to recognize some of the chesed of Hashem. And I sat down to write down, some of the good parts of what occurred. And I was very surprised that I couldn't stop. It was overwhelming. 12 months ago, last year, Shabbos Haggadol, I couldn't catch my breath. I had painful shortness of breath that lingered for many weeks. And it made me think, I have to be more conscious about my health. So I started being very careful about everything I eat. More exercise. That was a major benefit to me. That was a major chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Most of my shiurim now, I used to drive into Queens every day. Everything's on Zoom. I have about an hour and a half longer every single day. I have much more time to learn. I'm able to reach many more people through Zoom. Few of my younger kids, they were in school, but they would have been better off if they could be at home with their mommy a little bit longer. And sure enough, the Rebbe Shem gave them another 6 months at home. And they blossomed. So what we think, Vayedaber Elokim El Moshe, we think it's Midas Hadin, but the Rebbe Shem is telling us, Ani Hashem, it's all Midas HaRachamim. Whether it's Hashem, whether it's Elokeinu, it's all Hashem Echad. So there was a Yasaim. There's a kid who's turning bar mitzvah, and Nebuch, kid has no father, and the Almana, the mother, calls up and asks, and he says, my kid is really into singing, maybe you can make some arrangements for the bar mitzvah. So the Askin gets a hold of a singer, I believe Rabbi Arla Samet, and they say, no, Rabbi Arla, there's this Yasaim, and he could be Mesameachim, but what? He says, no, there's not really money involved. This is my parnasa, it's not right. He said, come on, the kids are yasa, yimein lecha simcha l'vnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, kim sameach, yisoyim va'amanos. All right. So he goes, he sits next to the bar mitzvah bacher, he is the life of the party, he makes a whole matzav, he elevated the whole simcha. Next day he gets a call of the Department of Health. Ta hayisa etmol bebar mitzvah? Ken. Yashavte etzel habachor bar mitzvah? Ken. Habachor yesh lo corona. Oy vey. Ata tzarech leishtei bebidud. So he thinks, this is what I get from doing a mitzvah. Now I lose another 2 weeks of parnasa. I don't get paid for that gig, and I lose another 2 weeks of parnasa. A few days later, he's not feeling well. He has a fever, he's sick, he has corona. So this is what I get. 3 weeks off the job, I get sick from doing a mitzvah. A few weeks later, he gets a call from America. Major organization, they're making an extravaganza, 100 Yisoimim who didn't have a bar mitzvah because of corona. Could you come? We heard from an Askin who was at the bar mitzvah. You were at Eretz Yisrael, that you really know how to liven up such things. We want to hire you. And he's waiting to hear, but there's no, and we're going to make it worth it for you. And they offer him what he would ordinarily make in 6 months. A few days later, he gets a call, we really feel bad. But in America, they're very makbid. We don't think this is going to work out unless, of course, you have antibodies. He got the job. Rav Biederman, that was also a Rav Biederman story. Rav Biederman tells the story of a guy in Bnei Brak. It's always the guy in Bnei Brak. I'd love to meet this guy. He has a clothing store and he makes a big sale. He sells 1,300 shekel of clothing. The seller is very happy. It's a lot of business. A week later, he gets a call from the credit card company. The guy's disputing the charges. He says he never got the goods. So wait a minute, it's not true. I gave him all the suits. They say, you have proof? So what? You want proof that he took the goods? I mean, what do you want? I didn't take a picture. Back and forth. He calls the guy up. He says, I don't understand. You're a shakran. You walked out with half my store. The guy says, I got mixed up. No, not you. I'm sorry. There's a big mix-up. I'll bring the money immediately tomorrow. Guy doesn't show. He says, I'm sorry. I got delayed. Days pass. Weeks pass. The guy realizes it's farfalin. He ain't getting the money. He's mamish tzebrachin. Then all of a sudden the government is giving out a stipend. The government is giving out grants for businesses that lost during Corona. He gets 5,500 shekel. He's talking it over with his accountant. The accountant said, you're lucky, you barely made the cut over here. If you would have had 1,300 more shekel, you would have missed the cut. You wouldn't have got the check. So you think it's bad, you think it's midas hadin, vayedaber Elokim el Moshe, vayomer elav ani Hashem. For me personally, the last 12 months have been a difficult time as well. Sometimes even very painful. Relocated from a new kehillah. But I am comforted. And I feel unusual simcha. And it's something that I'm working on as well. To try to feel that what appears to us as Vayedaber Elokim is really Vayomer Elav Ani Hashem. To recognize and to integrate. Shema Yisrael, listen up Yedin. Hashem, what you think is Midas Harachamim, Elokeinu, what you think is Midas Hadin, it's all the Rachamei Shamayim, it's all Hashem Echad. So the night of the Seder, we start with matzah and we say, thank you Hashem for the good times in life. And it says Rabbi Avram Shor, and I thank my dear friend Rav Meir Bronstein, the Rav of the Aguda of Far Rockaway. He quotes Rav Avram Shor in Halekach V'Alivav, page Yotes. He says, we eat the Marror. And we say, Rebbeinu Shalom, we thank you for the bitterness also. We thank you for the hard times as well. For the challenges, for the Marror, for the difficulties. That's also your chesed. That's also your rachamim. But then says Reb Shor, we eat the kairech. we take the matzah and the maror together, and we say, Rebbeinu Shalom, they're equal in our eyes. The rachamim and chesed that are apparent from what is openly rachamim, and the rachamim that we feel from what seems to be midas hadin, it's all the same, it's all equal. But then says Reb Shor, we are elevated to the highest madrega, afikoimin, just matzah. When we recognize there's only matzah, there's only hatava v'rachamim. Aber der Nacht from Pesach, Essen mir nar matzah. Halayla hazeh kulay matzah. The night of Pesach, there's only midas harachamim. The night of Pesach, we're propelled to the Madrega where we see clearly, Vayedaber Eloikim El Moshe, Vayomer Elav Ani Hashem. Through the matzah, then the maror, then the koyach, then the afikoimin, we reach the ultimate yichud shamayim, the ultimate kabbalas malchus shamayim. Says Rabbi Avram Shor in an incredible gematria. The gematria of matzah, maror, koyrech, afikoimin with the 4 words, 1118, is the same gematria as Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. That is our avodah the night of the Seder. The Kabbalas Malchus Shamayim, that even the Marror is l'tov aseinu, is for our benefit. The rest of the year, there's day and there's night. There's day, there's times of chesed, times of apparent kindness, midas harachamim, of lahagid ba'boker chastecha, and there are nights. There are times that midas hadin is prevalent. The midas hadin is manifest. The night of Yetzias Mitzrayim, Hashem proclaimed to the world, Vayedaber Eloikim El Moshe. The midas hadin unmasks itself. Vayomer Elav Ani Hashem. There is no din. It's pure rachamim. It's all mercy. It's all midas hachesed. V'Hashem heir einai. The Rebbeinu Shalom illuminated my eyes. That perhaps this is the deeper meaning of Laila Kayoim Yair. Leil Hiskadesh Hachag, says Azayar, Hoysa Me'ira Li Yisrael B'Mitzrayim Kitzeis HaShemesh. The Rebbeinu Shalom gave Klal Yisrael the insight. There's no Laila, all the shibud, all the maror, all the bitterness, all the difficulties. It expedited the Gula, made the Gula possible. It was the ultimate realization of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. It's not enough to tell your children Hashem freed us. We have to teach them that 210 years was part of the Cheros. That was the Geula. That made the Geula possible. It's been a long 12 months. And a much even longer 2,000 years. But the Navi tells us, and we read this on the last day of Pesach, Hinei Kael Yeshua Sievtach. Behold, the Rebbeinu Shalom is my salvation. I trust in Him, v'lo yefchad, and I am not frightened. Ki aziv v'zimras ka, my strength and the majesty of God, v'yihil Yeshua, brings us salvation. And on the great day of the coming of Mashiach, the Navi teaches us, Rebbeinu Shalom will give us the insight. Not just to say thank you Hashem for Mashiach, thank you for the Geula. V'yamarta b'yoim hahu. We're going to say on that day, Oidecha Hashem, I thank you Hashem. Ki anafta bi, that you were angry at me. Yashuv apicha, you reverted your wrath. Usenachameini, and you comforted me. How stirring it is that the conclusion of the final Haftarah of Pesach, we read the words, V'yamarta b'yoim hahu, we're going to say on that day. After 2,000 years, not thanks Hashem for bringing us back to Eretz Yisrael. Thank you Hashem for the Galos. On Pesach, you could lift up the Marror and you could kiss the Marror. And we can yearn deeply for the day that the Rebbeinu Shalom will give us that clarity to look back at 2,000 years of Galos and say, Oidcha Hashem ki anafta bi. On Shabbos Haggadol, we yearn for the promise of the Navi, of Tzahali Varoini Yosheves Tzion, Ki gadol b'kirbecha kadosh Yisrael. May we all be zoicha b'karoiv nahel niteichana peduyin l'tzion berina l'shana haba b'Yerushalayim achag kasher v'sameach.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.